Well, I am so delighted to be here today with my mayor, Janice Laking. Thank you so much, Janice, for being with us today.
Well,
so good to see you.
Travis, this is fun to have a young man in my house.
Oh, there we go. Well, I'm excited to interview you.
Two young men.
That's
We've
right.
got a photographer too.
That's right. And it's just been so great over the past week getting to visit with you and learn a little bit about your legacy and your career. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And I want to start off by asking a little bit about your family background. So just to start things off, where did you grow up?
Barry?
And how would you describe the Barry that you grew up in?
Well, when I left Barry in 1948, when I finished high school, we moved to St. Thomas. My father, who was a lawyer in Barry, had been appointed to the bench, and we moved to St. Thomas, which was the seat for Ogden County. And when I left Barry, the population of Barry was a little under 10,000. The population of St. Thomas, which had 6 American railroads running through it, no Canadian ones, was 20,000. And I sort of like to tell the story that the population of St. Thomas, I think now, is somewhere between 20 and 25,000. And Barry has grown
a little bit bigger than 10,000.
Quickly. We were having at that time, my high school days, it was always a bit of a struggle to decide whether Barry or Aurelia was bigger. And one year it was Barry, and the next year it would be Aurelia, and so that they were running pretty parallel at that time.
Okay.
They're not so parallel now, as you know.
What are some of your earliest memories of Barry?
Swimming off the Barry dock, which was the only place that we went swimming in those days. Oh, and Diamond's Pond, which was over by where the horse racing took place. Barry was just, and being the first people in Willow Creek at the 24th of May, that was the, we'd all bicycle out to Midhurst to have a swim in Willow Creek. Barry was a great place to live. I grew up in a house that had a badminton court in the front yard and lots of space, and I walked back and forth to Central Collegiate. Victoria Street Public School, which is no longer, was on the corner of Owen and Collier Street, and was taken down, and there was post office that was taken down, and now there's a bank. But that was my public school. I started my early days, we lived on McDonald Street halfway up the hill. My father was the mayor the year that I was born, and so I always had some interest in public affairs.
And what was your father's name?
Duncan Fletcher McCuaig, McCuaig. Have you ever seen that many vowels?
No, I haven't.
He came from Morrow Township.
Tell us a little bit about your family and your siblings.
I have one brother who's 5.5 years younger, and he's now in the States. He went over to do his master's and PhD in Ann Arbor, and never came home.
There you go.
That's my sibling. My own family. We had 7. Our youngest daughter, and we had 7 in 10 years thereabouts.
Wow.
Our youngest daughter was Down syndrome. She had a very bad septum hole in her heart, and we knew when she was born that her days were numbered. She lived for 11 months, and we enjoyed her while we had her. She was in and out of hospital, but never strong enough to have surgery on to repair the heart. So we lost her at that stage. And we lost our second daughter to breast cancer when she was in her early 30s. Her 2 daughters were 3 and 5, just starting, one of them just starting to school. But all 6 of my children graduated from university and found interesting careers, and the others are all hale and hearty.
Your other half is John. Can you tell me a little bit about how you met John?
Oh, well, we went to high school together.
Oh, so he's a Centralite as well.
Yes, that's right.
Very nice.
Yeah, but he went Prince of Wales School, so I didn't know him when I was in public school. I had to graduate to Central to find John.
So, your early political career, you joined council in 1972. Can you describe to us what Barrie looked like in the early 70s and what wards you originally represented?
Barrie's population then was 48,000. And I represented Ward 3, which was, we had just 3 wards then. They ran out from the lake. And they ran from the lake to the city limits. I wish they still did, and then people would know what ward they were in. And at that time, there were 12 members on council. There were 3 members in each ward.
Okay.
So I wasn't running against somebody. I was running for a seat when I ran in 72, and I wish that was still the case too.
Were there any other women on council at this time?
Doreen Parker was the mayor.
Okay.
Yeah.
So were you the 2 women?
Yes.
Just the 2 of you. Very, very interesting. So you were in many...
But Barrie has a history of women.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was, when I became mayor, I was the 3rd woman mayor in Barrie. You know, Dorian and Janice and Mayor Hamilton.
Okay.
Marjorie Hamilton.
When you joined council in 1972, what were some of the challenges that Barrie was facing in the early 70s?
Well, I sat on the planning committee, so for me, the challenges always were the planning issues, the decisions on where growth would take place, what kind of growth there would be. You know, well, I remember Mr. Kozloff coming in when the Kozloff Mall went in and, you know, telling us he was going to build the best mall ever, and it was going to have marble floors, and it was going to have a fountain in the center of it, and all of which he produced. And I almost cried when I was in that mall last week, because much of what Lou Kozloff wanted to give to the city has gone. I mean, there are a lot of empty stores, partly because of some of the planning decisions that have been made at the south end, and many of the stores that are there are not the upper end ones that started into that mall. And I talked to one of the security people as I was walking out, and I said, it makes me feel really badly. Lou Kozloff would be really upset because, you know, to me, and I mentioned that because that was one of the big decisions at the time, whether the Bayfield Mall, you know, what was going to go in there and how many square feet, and then Lou's property was on the top end of St. Vincent Street, which really was the city limits at that point, and so it was a decision as to whether, you know, you could put another mall there and not ruin Bayfield Mall, and those were some of those planning issues, and of course all the lakeshore kind of things became very important.
In the 1970s, what were the parameters of Barrie? You mentioned, you know, Bayfield Street just kind of being at the top of the north end. You know, paint us a picture of what Barrie extended to when you were joining council.
Well, it went, my ward went out to Miller Drive.
Okay.
Which is still the city limit.
That's right,
at this point. My ward went down to Brock Street. So my ward was from Bayfield to Brock.
Okay.
To Miller Drive, you know, to the city limits outside. The south end, I'd have to think just where I mean, certainly there's been some extension. Maple View came in later.
Right. Probably around Essa and Timberwalk, that was the end of Barrie right there, and then Holly afterwards going up Essa
Well,
Road.
Timberwalk was built during my early days on council. And yes, the radio station and television station were right at the edge of the city.
Right.
At the south end, I have to think about that. We'll come back to it.
Sounds good. The mayor previous to you coming in on council in 1972 was Lester Cook.
Yes.
What do you remember about Lester Cook?
Oh, well, Les Cook was a very good mayor. He also was the economic development officer. You know, he had done a lot of work with Chamber of Commerce on economic development prior to coming in, and so he had a strong bent in that area. Now, I didn't ever serve on council with Les, so my knowledge of Les was because of my interest in politics, not because.
Did Les run against Dorian Parker, or did he just resign from being mayor?
No, he ran against Dorian Parker.
And Dorian Parker beat Les?
Yes. Actually, Bentley beat Les first. Bentley came in as mayor in 68, 70. And then Les came back as mayor from 70 to 72, and then lost to Dorian. And Bentley came back as an alderman that year.
Oh, okay.
So he was on for 2 years as an alderman, and then got some sort of a government job and left Barrie.
So let's talk a little bit about Dorian Parker. What are your memories of Dorian Parker as mayor? From what I've read,
You don't want me to tell you about her as a baseball player, eh? That seemed to be her.
A claim to fame, apparently.
Well, that was her favorite topic of conversation, was her ability as a baseball player.
Okay.
And of course, Queen's Park was the big baseball diamond at the time. Dorian as mayor. Was fair. She had a lot of good people working with her, including in her office. You know, she had Jerry Tamlin was the city administrator at that time. Now that's the father of Brian Tamlin.
Okay.
Was at Georgian College and
Yep.
is presently the Liberal candidate. Jerry Tamlin was an engineer and was very capable as a city administrator. Now, he died very suddenly in the mid-70s, but he was there throughout Dorian's years, or almost there throughout her 4 years, and he was certainly a strong help. So
Right.
we had good government.
That's good. And you're the two, explain to me the dynamic there, because you were the only two women. Was there a sense of camaraderie, or was there, you know, what did that dynamic look like with the two of you being the only females on council?
It's funny that you should sort of center on that, because I didn't ever think about that. I was out at a party the other day, and I sort of looked around until I found a table with a lot of men and sat down with them and said that, you know, that's partly why I went into politics, because I really like working with men and visiting with men. Because in those days, I mean, it wasn't just Barrie Council. Barrie Council, to have 2 women out of 12, or out of 13, you know, was pretty unusual. When we went to Association of Municipalities of Ontario, it was, there were very few women elected across Ontario at that time.
Did you find that you worked well with Dorian during her time as mayor?
Yeah, I think as well as anybody did. Dorian was a little bit of a my way or the highway kind of, rather than finding people to do things together. But yes, I sat on the planning committee during those years, and we were busy.
Tell us about your first bid for mayor, because some people will be interested to know that you had a bid in the 70s, and why you ran, and why do you think it wasn't successful?
Well, I had been on council for 6 years, 1978. Ross Archer was the mayor at the time, and Ross Archer was a good mayor. But there was a proposal for a cedar project, which supposedly was going to be funded by the province. In reality, a lot of the funding was going to come from the city. And I felt that the discussion we were having on it had very strong financial implications for the city, which were not public. And I was cross about that, and I wanted to, I said, you know, if I get in, I'm going to make this public. And as it turned out, I didn't get in, but the facts were made public right after the election. It was very hard to get the election focused on the Cedar project, which was my focus. It was a planning issue in the downtown. And Cedar projects that went into cities like Hamilton and Peterborough and London didn't last long. None of them are there. They were supposed to be an impetus for the downtown, and but they didn't work out that way. But I had trouble getting people focused on the Cedar project because I also, for the 3 years before that, had been working very hard to save our original city hall.
Yes.
It was known at that time as the fire hall, because all that was left in it was the fire base at one end and some engineers and some pigeons.
Yeah, you mentioned that to me. Can you describe to us where that building was situated when you were trying to save it?
And well, it was on the corner of Mulcaster and Collier. Okay. And there's a flower bed there now and a parking lot adjacent to the old Simcoe Foresters building.
So you earned yourself a title during this campaign as the lady who's trying to save...
You know, the woman that wants to save old buildings that are going to fall down, you know, what a waste of energy. And we had some a little bit of provincial money in a Make Work program that we were able to hire some very talented young people to... And we had a lot of volunteer help. I had, you know, Tony Gilson, who at the time had been an architect in Ireland and at the time was teaching art at Georgian College. He did architectural drawings. We pulled apart a lot of the inside of that building. We took out all the false ceilings so that we had the full ceilings exposed and the stained glass windows, which had been under the false ceiling, and we got rid of some of the pigeons. And we had a theater set up for the bays, the fire, you know, the firefighting fire truck bays, and we were going to have a small Passe Muraille theater there. We were going to have art galleries. We were going to have craft rooms. We even had the lockup for the jail downstairs, so if anybody misbehaved, we could
throw them down there.
We knew exactly where to put them. And you know, and we were doing really well at that. On the other side of the and council at the time, with its 12 members, 13 members, was voting 5 votes to take it down. I mean, 6 votes to take it, 7 votes to take it down, 6 to keep it there. I mean, there was just a lot of flex depending on what day and what particular motion came forward. But it was, you know, there was pretty good expectation that it was going to come down. And I have people now who were on that council that voted to take it down that tell me what a tragic mistake it was, that they really feel badly about, you know, their position that they took at that time. Because it would have been, I mean, it was a better theater, it was a bigger theater than we now have at the 5 Points, you know, and there were lots of other really good parts of that building that should have been saved, and we had enough money to sort of show the public what could be there. Yes, it would take some more, but, you know, the other side of the coin was people were saying, you know, we can't insure it for enough money to save people's lives that are walking down Mulcaster Street, because that building's going to fall over on them. When they took the demolition, when I lost in 1978, and they took the demolition permit out, they had to come back 3 times to get additional money to take the building down. It was triple brick. I mean, it was built to last. And it was certainly not going to fall down on anybody on Mulcaster Street, and still would have been one of the treasures that we had.
Well, you mentioned Ross Archer, and you lost to Ross Archer on the first bid as mayor. What are your memories of working with your predecessor before you were mayor Ross Archer?
Oh, Ross Archer, and Ross was a good mayor. Ross was very much public works oriented. The public works building is named after him. It's called the Archer Building. In fact, I guess it's called the Ross Archer Building. So that we had different interests. You know, mine were more cultural and more artsy and more planning, and his were more water and sewer and road. And so we had a good time together. You know, he looked after his part and I looked after my part, and I worked hard with him.
Would Ross had overseen the extension of the water filtration down on Bradford Street when that got expanded in the
Well,
70s
one of the
and 80s?
times, yes, it has been expanded a number of times,
Right.
but yes, that certainly would have been one of the things under his jurisdiction at that time.
And speaking of things down in the waterfront, our waterfront has had a significant transformation, which began in the mid-1960s. What memories do you have of the advances council made to continue to develop Barrie's iconic waterfront during the 1970s?
Well, as I told you, up until 1948, when I finished high school, the only place that we went swimming was we met after school down at the, or after work in the summertime, down at the Barrie Dock. And
Right.
there actually was a diving tower installed on the dock, and you know, that was a teenage hangout in those days. Or if you were really ambitious, you could get on a bicycle and bike all the way around to, it seemed like a long time, then over to Minette's Point.
Okay.
Good beach there.
Right.
But that was outside Barrie
And
at that
everything-
point. That wasn't part of Barrie.
And everything in between was just railway track, and the water came right up to the track, right?
Yes, yes it was.
Wow.
So my husband would get over to Minette's Point more quickly than I would, because he'd hop a freight, but I didn't do that.
So do you remember what kind of advancements took place in developing that section between Bayfield and Minette's Point when you were on council in the 1970s?
Well, a good bit of what we have down there is fill.
Right.
So that, you know, the Barrie train station, I'm trying to think when that train station came down, which was also too bad.
I think it was the 60s at some point.
Well, I remember we used to take our children when they were small down and skate on the bay, and we'd change into their, you know, put their skates on in the train station. And, you know, the youngest of mine was born in '63, and they were smallish, so yes, you know, it would have been in the 60s, late 60s probably that it came down. The other was, you know, a relatively slow process because we were sort of collecting fill where
Right.
we could when construction was taking place and adding it in. And of course we had to work very closely with federal government. There were, you know, a fair number of federal government regulations in terms of filling.
Centennial
I don't
Park
know whether
went-
we could even do it now.
Right.
But,
And Centennial Park would have gone in '67, so that was kind of like the main focal point, I guess, between those two areas that we were talking about. Well, and then for the longest time, it wasn't until you were mayor that Lakeshore got pushed through all the way around the bay. It used to,
well,
Turn
and
into
it
Tiffin
was
there.
while I was mayor that the old CNR Mechanics building became the South Shore Center.
right.
You know, we kept part of it for heritage purposes and built onto it to allow what's there now.
Now, Barrie has seen a lot of significant retail developments, but some of the earliest ones happened in the late 60s, and I have a couple of dates here. Towers went in 1967, and the Kmart went in 1970, which today is the Bay. And of course, where Towers is Walmart today. And Bayfield Mall went in 1972, and Georgian Mall in 1973. And what caused this retail boom at the north end of what was then Vesper Township? And was it received well by the city and the council at the time?
Well, there was a lot of pressure. I mean, what creates that are the retailers that want to be there. And they decide where they want to be there. And Barrie, during those heydays at Bayfield Street, really was the recipient of a lot of Simcoe County shopping. You know, people came in from Midland and Penetang and Aurelia. Those places all have some facsimile of those malls now, and so the malls in Barrie don't get the kind of traffic from outside of Barrie that they did. in those early days of those, that was fairly new kind of development
Mm-hmm.
at that time, and so it became, people came in and spent Saturday. It wasn't always Sunday opening in those days.
Mm-hmm.
Spent Saturday in town or spent some evening time in town, and also had meals, and so it also was a help for some of the, the eating establishments in the area.
And these establishments, they built in, at the time, what was Vesper Township. It hadn't become the city of Barrie. Talk to me about the tension between that, because I know it was many years after that area was finally annexed into the city of Barrie.
And we paid the county quite a bit of money at that time, because that was, supposed to ameliorate some of the taxation that they were losing. And I have to laugh about that now, because one of the things that amuses me, and it's a little bit of history for you. When I first went on council, when I first went on, I guess Ben Strawn was the clerk. He later became the administrator after Jerry Tamlin died very unexpectedly. Ben became the administrator for a number of years, until I made the change to Peter Lee in the late 80s. But I remember Ben used to complain about, when we became a city in 1957, and that's back to Kinsey's day. When we became a city, there was an exchange of money that took place, and the city paid this, and the county wanted this, and all of it seemed to go to the county, and he was upset because the county got 3 more machines of some sort. I don't know whether they were front-end loaders or if they were trucks, but they got 3 more machines than Barrie did, and it wasn't fair. And I think, how short-sighted all of that was. The county, and Barrie was part of the county, all those years before that, has all those forests, all that land. And now if they want to make a donation of a few $1 million to the hospital, all they do is sell part of the forest tract that they had up on Essa Road that became part of the city of Barrie.
Oh, okay.
They had a township forest up there. And they sold it to developers because the land was now in the city, and they had all that money in their jeans to do whatever they wanted to do with it. So, the business of having one more truck and never looking at some of those long-range assets that the county had, and their forests are probably still their greatest asset. And they were started, they were picked up when people were having trouble paying their taxes back in Depression days, and when E.C. Drury, who lived at Crown Hill and became part of the provincial government, knew that it was important to plant some of those low sands to be able to keep the property.
So these retail outlets that went up on Bayfield Street, did they choose to do that in Vesper Township because it was cheaper to build there at the time?
Oh, well, it certainly would have been. Did they? Maybe it was also, maybe there wasn't available land within the city. I mean, there certainly was in the downtown if they were going to pay downtown prices, but they picked that up pretty cheaply.
And you mentioned that the city paid a decent chunk of change to annex that part of Vespera. Did that happen during your time on council or as mayor?
Not as mayor, no. As my time on council, yes.
Tell us the story behind the Gables in Tyndale Park. Because I know there's a great story there.
Well, Tyndale Park first. They're 2 different pieces of property.
Okay.
Tyndale Park was a Jewish camp for mothers and babes.
Okay.
And it operated, out of Toronto, where, when people wanted to get up onto a nice lake and have a summer holiday, and it was operated by, I don't know who, but I know it was, it was the Jewish, they were Jewish families generally that were coming up. So it was owned by some foundation. And it it ran out of steam and was up for sale. And the city of Barrie bought it, and those were my early years on council. That would be in the 70s probably. And it was in Innisfil now, you know,
Right.
we were just talking about land investment.
Annexation, yeah.
But it was in Innisfil, and the provincial rules at that time allowed municipalities to buy property outside of their boundaries if it was for parkland or for transportation.
Oh, okay.
So we were allowed to do that.
Wow.
And
So Barrie had a city park outside of the city.
that's right. Yeah.
Wow.
In Innisfil, and it was
'Cause
quite a few years later before that.
It was
became
annexed. I think it was 82 that all
Yeah,
that Innisfil
yeah,
area was annexed.
Now the Gables is a different piece of property, and it's much closer to Barrie.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Tyndale is still pretty much on the edge of the Barrie area. It shouldn't be, because we should have taken in. We were to have taken in, and we had an agreement with Innisfil to take in down to, and I don't know what line it is, but I know it's just below the Georgian College property.
Right, so the
On
Big
the
Bay
bay.
Point, yeah,
Yeah,
almost to the point.
Yeah, down to Big Bay, not down to the point, but down to where the facility that's owned by Georgian College. Yeah. And that, you know, that should have happened, instead of which they went out into blow sands in Essex Township, and I don't know what the, it was, anyway, part of it probably was even my fault, because we had an agreement, when that annexation took place, we had an agreement that 8 years later, which would have been in my term,
Mm-hmm.
we were to complete the annexation, which was to take that much more and south of Painswick. And that never happened. And it wasn't for lack of talking, but it was for lack of action, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I actually was quite friendly with the mayor of Innisfil during those years, and the right solution would have been for us to put Innisfil and Barrie together.
Mm.
And I kept telling him, we'll call it all Innisfil if you like, you know. I'm
Mhm.
not, now that I'm so keen on Sir Robert Barrie and our heritage for a naval captain, and you know, all of which is going to come up in the near future again. And we visited Harrogate, which is where Sir Robert Barrie is buried in his ancestral home 2 years ago. So now that I'm so keen on Sir Robert Barrie and his heritage, I might not have been so interested, but I used to tell the mayor of Innisfil that that's all right, we could call it all Innisfil if you wanted to. And that's what should have happened. I mean, to do proper planning, you need to have a big enough area in which to plant. You can't just do this inch, and fill in swamps that shouldn't be filled in because of the pressure inside the boundaries that need some development.
So you're telling us about the Gables.
The Gables was given to the nurses of the hospital by Mr. Laidlaw.
Busman.
And the original, well, I'm not sure whether I think he was a lawyer in Toronto. I'm not sure what the connection with the Laidlaw bus is. I'm not sure that there is any connection. But the nurses' residence at the hospital was called the Laidlaw building because he gave the money to build the residence that was adjacent to the hospital for the nurses. And when he died, he left that piece of property, which was his summer, or his family's summer home on the lake, for the perpetual use of the nurses of Royal Victoria Hospital. If you're on the board for the hospital, you can sort of lose some of that intention when you need some money, and so the hospital board decided that, I mean, actually they should have given it to the city of Barrie, because the city of Barrie has put all sorts of money into hospitals, one place or the other, over the years, and they could have given it as a park to the city, And the city could have made some special compensation off the park for the nurses, so that, you know, it would always be open to the nurses. And it probably is open to the nurses now, but the city of Barrie paid a huge price for it. Because, as opposed to Tyndale, which we got very reasonably because it was open land and they didn't want to keep it any longer, this was in the city by the time we bought it, so it was valuable, and there was a plan of subdivision for all sorts of townhouses and apartments on it. So we paid a developer's price for the units that the hospital had told a developer he could put on it. So the hospital did very well. But the city got the land, and we were in the process in my years on council, all my years on council. We always bought, anytime we had an opportunity to buy waterfront property, we bought waterfront property. And there were a lot of small parcels along the way that we picked up. More than that, if any development was being done that abutted the waterway, the water, we asked for at least a portion of that water, of that frontage for the city. So we were trying to keep the property all the way around the lake.
The lake.
Yes.
The city.
And it was to be kept as parkland, and I often think now that, and I was just on my computer with O.J. Perry short while ago because we're both upset about what's happening at Midhurst to Springwater Park, and we've been doing some going on that.
Very good. After losing your bid for mayor, you had a break from council, but you returned in the mid-1980s. Now, the 1985 Barrie tornado was...
Oh, I came back very fast, actually.
Yeah. What year did you come back?
I came back in 80.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah.
So
I'm a sophomore in term. And terms were 2 years at that point.
Oh, I see. Okay. 1985, the tornado hits.
Yes.
Worst natural disaster probably in the 20th century that Barrie had faced. I know there had been some floods and some other things on Clapperton Street back in the 19th century, but one of the...
Well, more than that, it's probably the worst tornado in terms of lost life that Ontario has ever seen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe that Canada has ever seen.
How did council respond to this natural disaster?
Well, we personally went out and picked up a lot of stuff and helped clean up. I mean, I think we responded well. You know, Jack McAllister, who was the fire chief at that time, was in charge, and we set up a committee of council and some people on, some other people that volunteered to sit on the committee to take in donations to help people. You know, one of the worst things that and I think about it every time we have people asking for money for some disaster around the world. One of the hardest things we had was we had a lot of money left over in the end, and what should you do with it?
Interesting.
You know, because a lot of those people, their insurance covered the things, you know, and people were very generous sending in money. And,
so where did that extra money go?
Well, I was afraid you were going to ask me that because I'm trying to remember. I think it got donated. I know it wasn't kept by the city, and
It's put to use in some
it
regard.
was, yeah, it was put to use in some kind of donations after we used some portion of it, maybe to cover some of the parks that we had to fix up and things ourselves. Like Sheer Park was pretty well devastated at the time, and but I still remember, you know, people sort of scratching their head, now what are we going to do with this, because it was donated for, and people, it sat there for a long while because people had a long period of time, had years in which they could still make application for it.
Super.
What did we do about it? You know, I get amused by the kind of emergency measures that we practice. You know, it's become a huge effort of police and fire, not just in Barrie, but worldwide. How do you ever plan for what kind of disaster is going to happen? You know, and you can't cover it all. I think, you know, it just showed the resiliency of people and equipment that was required. We had Mennonites come in and volunteer their time. And, you know, it showed a wonderful community effort. You know, I remember my family being over on Tower Crescent, you know, picking up furniture and helping people and cleaning up things. And I think the citizens of Barrie came forward, and you know, you can't ever replace you can replace the houses, you can't replace the people we lost, and that was very unfortunate. But I don't think any kind of planning would have saved them anyway. So.
Well, that's wonderful just to see how the city did, and that is true. That the story is about how our city came together and pulled through. All right, so I got this beautiful picture of you here with the mayor's medallion on.
Chain of office.
Chain of office is the official title.
Yep.
Tell us about your second bid for mayor. This is when you won, and why you chose to run again, and who your opponents were.
I ran in 1988, and well, I know O.J. Perry was one of them, and Alec Arthur was one of them. No, Perry wasn't, because he was on my council after that, I guess. Alec Arthur was, you know, was the one that was supposed to win, and didn't, and got cross and left Barrie. Too bad, because he had made a real contribution to the city. I ran in '88, and there were a number of people running against me.
Why did people vote for Janice Laking, and what issues did you run on during this election?
I could never promise anybody anything. You know, my promise when I first went door to door, and I first went door to door when I won in '72. And it was very unusual in those days.
To be knocking on the doors.
On doors. And I knocked on every door in the ward at that time. I did, or people that were helping me with me in sight did. The only thing that I ever promised was that I would work hard and that I would spend my money the same way, their money the same way I spend mine, very carefully. And I don't think I offered anything other than that when I ran in '88 either.
Have another great picture of you in the city chambers that I think folks at home would enjoy seeing. With the remind me, what is that called again? The
chain of office.
Chain of office.
Yeah, and that started off when the city became a city in '57, and so it will have the name of each mayor
inscribed on each part of the medallions.
Yes. Yeah, on the medallion around it, and the crest of the city, which I gave you a little picture of
we have
here
that
somewhere too.
Let me grab that. It's right under here. The people are the city, right there.
That's right, and it has that crest on it.
That's...
Well, it doesn't have that crest on it, maybe. That's funny, I'm gonna have to go and have a look at it again. I mean, this crest was put together by Ozzie Rowe, who was a lawyer in town, and
when was that done?
Sometime after I was in office, because I picked up the original of this at the College of Arms in London. City didn't send me to London to do it. I just happened to be in London anyway, so I went down on the Mall, which was where it was, and picked it up and brought it back with my own luggage because we were holidaying in England.
Okay.
So it was when I was an alderman, and I'm not sure that I remember for sure. 1977. Janice Laking, on the 22nd of August 1977, picked it up from the College of Arms. It's the patent that Ozzie Rowe put together. And it's interesting in that the supporting figures are a uniformed soldier representing Base Borden, and the goddess of farmland representing the rural area around the city. This is the water of the city, and there's a significance to each part of it. And
it's great.
Yeah, it's a great crest.
And of course, Yeah, down memory lane we have, we were talking earlier about your time as alderman, and there's your little badge, 1973, J.R. Laking. What's the R, what's the middle name?
Ruth.
Ruth, Janice R. Laking. And I think we have
What
another,
year was that? That's fun because every year you had a different one.
73 to 78.
Okay, so that was from when I first, because the elections actually were in 72 and
Okay.
I took office in 72.
73. Okay.
But at the first council meeting may at that time have been in 73 until 78, and that was the break, yeah.
And
Then
then
I'd get another one with different years on after that.
yeah, and then in 1988 you got an upgrade.
Oh, I did.
You did. That one says mayor.
That's right.
And you held that position for 12 years. Tell us, what were the first orders of business when you took office in 1988? What were some of the first things that you just got to?
Well, the big push was the rapid growth that we were experiencing.
Right. You opened up the extension to Lakeshore. I know that happened in 88.
Yes. But it was a case of, people in Barrie were quite jealous of Barrie and the size that Barrie was. And they didn't really want all these people coming from down south. Actually, Doreen Parker had a very famous picture in one of the Toronto papers where she stood out on the highway and said, "Stay in Toronto," or "Don't come here," or some such sign once upon a time. Yes. Because, well, it was a fairly, people whose knowledge was fairly limited.
Mm-hmm.
That was a fairly popular thinking that you could put up barbed wire and, you couldn't help it.
Mm.
We were within 1 hour of the biggest metropolitan area in Canada.
Yeah.
We were within 1 hour of where all the immigration still comes. I mean, some comes to Montreal and some comes to Vancouver, but it's minuscule compared to what comes into Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
And when those people want to buy their first house and they can't afford to buy one in Toronto, they
Come to Barrie.
move to the closest place that has good transportation where they can afford a house and where their kids can have a backyard.
Mm.
And so the push for growth was huge.
Mm.
And the province was supporting the growth of Barrie in that they were offering developers some extra bonuses for smaller lots and tighter kinds of development, which you know something of because some of it is on Letitia Street up at the other end now, which was the first really small lots.
Mm-hmm.
Now those lots look big compared to some of the things that are being developed now. Certainly we have gone even smaller than that.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the big push. And so my focus at that time was to say to the people of Barrie, growth is inevitable.
Mm.
But what we have to do is keep that small town feel with it. So how do we do the planning? How do we make the decisions that will still have you feel comfortable and think that you're still in a small town? And compared to being in Toronto, you are in a small town.
Mm-hmm. Now, we had talked a little bit more about the Lakeshore extension, and Ross Archer had laid down that framework to push the road around the bay. And I just remember being a kid, and up until that point, if you wanted to get to Allendale or through Allendale to Painswick, you'd have to take Burton Avenue and go into Highway 11. But suddenly, when that road got pushed through, it really connected the south end. It was
You
really...
gotta go back farther. What you do is you hop the freight train going south. You want to go down though, or Manette's Point.
This is John Laking in the background
It
talking
is.
to us about how he hopped freight trains back in the day. But why was that such an important project to finish, and what were the challenges building through the old CNR railway yard?
The whole Lakeshore was very, very important to all my council during those years. And what could happen on the Lakeshore. And one of the things that I thought that I had got that I felt really good about, I had an Asian developer who had a theater just on the outskirts of Toronto that wanted to build a convention center and theater in Barrie
Mm-hmm.
and wanted to put it adjacent to the South Shore Center.
Mm.
Now, we were still going to have the walking path in front, we were still going to have the road
Mhm.
behind,
Mm-hmm.
we were still going to have almost as much parkland. All he was going to take was the footprint for that building.
Mm-hmm.
He had a very successful theater in Toronto, and we needed a theater and we needed a convention center, and we still need both of those.
Mm-hmm.
And my council at the time decided that nothing but grass was going to grow on that parkland that we had taken in.
Mm.
So it's sort of interesting now to hear council of Barrie in 2015 saying, but we've got to, we've got to have a wow factor. We got to have some restaurants and we got to have some eateries, as if we were short of them in Barrie on the lake shore. Whereas my council through all those years was adamant that nothing was going to go on
Be
there
protected.
except grass. And we did push the sidewalk, the walking path, and we put that in partly as a bike path. That was the first discussion on it, was to put a bike path. And
Mm-hmm.
and I still remember Al Burns, who was on my council at the time and who was the push behind that bike path, saying, I can't even get on the bike path. There are too many people walking on it.
They had to split. They have a lane
Yes,
splitter. Bikes on one
so
side.
they put it lower and up and down one too, and because it has been very
Oh,
popular.
hugely popular. So my next question is related to a bit of a pet project that I've been working on just in the area of Painswick that I grew up in. But I'm just curious to know, do you have any memories of Foster Drive? Now I know Foster Drive was renamed for Helen Foster, who was on council. But do you have any memories of it when it was Tollendale Road and it was connected by a bridge at the end of it that folks remember and called it Thunder Bridge?
Oh, yes.
Do you have any recollection of that?
Yes, and it may indeed have been Thunder Bridge. My main Thunder Bridge in my growing up days was the Barrie one that went out to Shanibay Road.
To Chambay Road, yes, that's the other one that's referred to as Thunder Bridge, right?
But certainly Helen Foster's family, it was
Right.
a long-time family name on that street, and I remember when it was there, yes.
And the other thing that I've had folks mention to me before is that apparently on the corner of Foster and Highway 11 there, where the Midas Muffler sits today, there was some kind of campground, a camping area there. Do you ever recall that? This would be going back
Is
to the
that
50s.
Gilmore's? There was. I think that was Gilmore's campground. They had log cabins.
Yes, people have mentioned the log cabins before.
Yeah. We had log cabins up on
Bayfield Street.
Bayfield Street as well.
Oh, remarkable.
We
Yeah.
took one of the log cabins from there out to some bush property we
Same
have
like-
in Oral.
I had to move one of the cabins out to my bush out in Oral.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I know you're proud of many different...
Hoppies. That was the name of those cabins.
Hoppies, yeah.
Hoppies
Yeah,
cabins.
Hoppies. There must have been a Hopkins.
Where the road went down
Wait.
to Manette's, he was right on the corner there, and that was the
That would be
favorite
it.
hangout for
That would be it.
Yeah.
Hoppies.
Hoppy's Cabins. Well, it's
Well,
great.
his name was Hopkins, yeah. We were at school with a Hopkins girl.
Well, that's great to be able to put a name to that. We had talked before about a number of projects that you were very proud of, and I want to mention a couple of them here and just maybe have you briefly comment on them. But the first one is Victoria Village and the transformation of the old RVH on Ross Street.
That was a tough one. I mean, to build roads and sewers is always popular with people. To do some of the soft services is a lot more difficult. And I had a lot of soft services that I felt good about. I built, I got people together and money together so that it wasn't city money to put in the skateboard park at Queen's Park, to put in the circle at the center at City Hall. And a lot of the McLaren Art Gallery was also, a lot of public money into. The hospital was moving, and that hospital property was for sale. And I guess I felt very strongly, because Queen's Park has been there forever, as far as I'm concerned. And it's across from Queen's Park, and it's in the, in the center of town, and it was important that it be maintained within city ownership. But more than that, when I went in 1988, one of my main focuses was to find some additional long-term care. My mother, who was living across the road and was in her 90s, close to 100 at that time, you know, was still driving her car to take people out to Beaton. You know, they had long-term care out in Beaton, and we didn't
Wow,
have enough
nothing in Barrie.
long-term care in Barrie. I
Mhm.
mean, well, there was some here, but it was very limited.
The IOF home on
The,
Baldwin.
the IOF home was there. What's now Leisure World had another name now.
Owen and
on
Wellington.
Owen Street was there, but it was very, very difficult for people that needed that kind of care to
Sure.
be able to get it in town.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they couldn't get it in town, they had a spouse in town that wanted to visit, and there's no transportation to Beaton, you know,
Right.
to go visit there, and the transportation of Collingwood and Penetang and Arroyo is also fairly limited, and that's where the long-term care, the county was putting long-term care beds in the county rather than in Barrie, was part of the problem. And I knew we needed it badly, so I put together a committee. I had some great people working with me, and our goal was to get some extra long-term care beds. So when the hospital moved and that building came up for sale, that seemed to be a logical place to try and do that long-term care. Now, I didn't get a lot of support I got support from council. Council, by majority, always was supporting what I was trying to do there. But staff from Barrie City Hall did it because council had agreed it should be done, but I didn't ever get any enthusiasm from them because they thought it was going to be a financial drain on the city. It never has been. So I had a lot of volunteer people. I had Rich Driscoll, who's head of all Barrie, and a number of other industrial enterprises in Barrie was phenomenal for me. And you know, he chaired the committee, and we had everything in place to get the beds, and then the province gave them to somebody that didn't even have any land. And Reg got upset and left me, and Sam Kinsella came in and filled in, and was a huge help from that time until we did get the beds 2 years later.
There's a great story with the late Sam Kinsella about how he pinched pennies out of every way that he could of that old building. Tell me the story about what he sold out of that building.
Oh, he sold the toilets, he sold the sinks, he sold, you know, at the hospital, you know, and I have not been a big supporter of the hospital since that time, because the hospital walked out and left all sorts of things behind that I think they should have either sold, or they should have, and I'm not suggesting they should have been selling the toilets, but they did have a really nice chapel with, you know, beautiful oak chairs and an oak table, and you know, there were lots of things. They walked out of there and left their stethoscopes hanging on the hooks, their blood bags hanging on the hooks. And when Sam tried to get them to take a lot of the plaques that, you know, that were honoring people that had given money in the past, they didn't want them. They didn't even want them if he took them over to them. So he really did do a job that in many ways the hospital, some of it the hospital should have done themselves, but he sold gurneys, you know, and there's some of them, there's a woodworker just outside the city that thinks that's the best thing that ever happened, because he could pile all his wood and move it from one place to the other on this gurney, you know, that he's still using, that he bought from the hospital. But so that Sam did work very hard to try and make ends meet financially in that period that we had when we really were ready to go ahead, but we had not been allocated the beds. The bed allocation is very valuable and will continue to be valuable to the city. Unfortunately, the city hasn't taken over that building. I think they should. The city had 1/3 of the building that they were using for recreational purposes. And they were renting out to you know, some of the rooms for different things, and they had some staff in there, and they backed away from that. And I'm not on the board of Vic Village anymore, but At some point, the city has to take it back because it should be in city ownership. It should not be in the ownership. Those beds are valuable, and it should not be in the ownership of a board for Vic Village.
Well, I'm so glad you highlighted the contribution of the late Sam Kinsella. And I'm hoping they named Bayview Park after him.
Sam was wonderful. Sam worked with Ross for 3 years, his first 3 years, and Ross didn't really know just how to manage Sam. Sam was quiet in lots of ways, but full of energy in other ways. And I think they just, when I became mayor in '88, I said to Sam, run. Get those ideas of yours working. I've got lots of faith in what you can accomplish, and I will help you in any way I can. And of course, any major decisions have to come back to council. But let your imagination go with you, you know. And we got a new library, which was part of that whole H block development. We got a bus station. He and I, even before that, had got the new, well, no, it was still after I was mayor, the new police building. We'd been talking about police buildings for years, and they kept bouncing around here and there, and we got it, and we planned for the future with it, much as people now say we didn't. But we just have got too much emphasis on police and too many policemen. That's the big problem. It isn't a problem of the building.
Another thing that you did that was quite remarkable is, Janice, you bought a railway. Most mayors don't buy railways.
No, and municipalities have never before ever bought railroads, I'm sure.
What's the story with that?
Well, the CNR had them for sale, and we had industries, one of them, Reg Driscoll's industry in town, Albury, that needed raw materials that were brought in by rail car. Moson's had to have raw material brought in. They have siding there. They had to their old building, which isn't even there anymore. And so that railroad, the ability to maintain that railroad to Barrie was very important from an industrial standpoint. Collingwood also had, and there were people within Barrie that had interest in some manufacturing that was going on in Collingwood, and we were encouraged to buy the line to Collingwood as well. And Collingwood bought the property for part of their end of it. We bought the line to Bradford and all the stuff within the city of Barrie. It was expensive. We would have no GO train if we hadn't done it, because they tore up that rail line. You know, there was a time frame. If we hadn't done it and done it quickly, that rail line would have come up. There's a fair bit of money in salvage of rail lines, which I wouldn't have known if I hadn't been in the business. So that the rail line to Aurelia came up from the city limits, which was a shame, because that part should have probably been kept too. But
City Farmers Market.
But there were two people that were operating out of what was the old Foresters building, or the old Market building, whichever you want to call it, is now the museum for the Grand Simcoe, and was a constituency office for our MPP for a number of years. There were two ladies that came each Saturday and sold their eggs, mostly eggs. They had a few knitted objects too. And Ann Black, who was on my council, one of the best aldermen, she and Sam Kinsella came on together in that first year that I was, well, they came on one term before I was there, but they were part of my council in '88 when I was mayor, and they were just wonderful. And Ann worked really hard with me, and we said we got to find something better, and we called a lot of the farm producers around from the township, as well as some of the crafters in town together, and we got the ministry involved, and we said, you know, how do we do this? And so that was, we started setting up stalls in outside in the courtyard when the weather was right, and inside when it wasn't. And as you know, it's a thriving business now. It's and that all came from, you know, when we got the two ladies. The two ladies came to And they liked it even better. There were a lot more people came and bought their eggs.
That's wonderful. You bought a lot of downtown property for parking lots as well.
Yes. Yeah, almost any time there was a piece of property that was vacant or that needed to have something come down on it in the downtown, in an area where we needed
Scooped it up.
parking, we scooped it.
What was?
Because it was much cheaper for us to provide that parking on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the disadvantage of parking garages in the city of Barrie is not just the original cost, which is lots.
Mm-hmm.
But as I knew from the parking garage that we have at City Hall, which we spend a lot of money on,
Mm-hmm.
when you drive cars that have been running on salty roads
Mm-hmm.
into underground garages that have got rebar, that salt disintegrates,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to pull up the whole thing and redo it every now and again.
Mm.
So the maintenance on indoor garages is significant. And we managed without. Now, that property that the garage went on, we did go out for proposals several times,
Mm-hmm.
but we didn't ever get a proposal. And we wanted a proposal that would provide some garage at somebody else's expense
Mm.
in return for some commercial
Mm-hmm.
or some residential higher up.
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't ever come up with an offer that met those criteria.
Mm. Janice, what was the easiest thing about being mayor?
Going to work.
What was the most difficult thing? Going to work.
No, not going to work. Probably the most difficult thing
Going home.
was the criticism that sometimes was leveled that was hard on my family. Unfortunately I didn't have too much of it. I got more of it when I was in the political arena, the liberal conservative kind of thing. That was nasty, and that's hard on your family. But no, going to work was a pleasure every day because you never knew. You never knew what the day was going to bring and what opportunities there were going to be, and I had a lot of opportunities.
Mm. Did you ever lose sleep over any decisions?
You know what? Not many.
Mm-hmm.
I lost sleep over whether I thought, what the right thing was to do in certain cases.
Mm-hmm.
But you see, the advantage, and I think in some ways my political endeavors, it probably was wise that they were unsuccessful,
Mm-hmm.
because I would have had to take a party stand and I would have had to say things that maybe I didn't believe in.
Mm-hmm.
The advantage of city politics without any political parties or any combination of groups, and I hope it will always be thus, is that you can say what you think and sleep at night.
Mm.
And if it's not right, at least you've voiced your opinion.
Mhm.
And if you lose the vote on it, the record is there that you thought this,
Mm-hmm.
the majority decided this, so the majority wins.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have got your name on what you felt was important.
Mm-hmm.
And I did lose some, but I didn't lose a lot of them, because I think the advantage of school teachers
Yes,
in politics.
you were a school teacher. Let's pause and tell me a little bit about that first. This is a little medallion you got from teaching at Barrie North.
I was at North Collegiate from 1960 until I retired in '88, except for 1 year that I taught at Central. And when my last child, my Ruthie, was born, I resigned. I was going to stay home. And then Ruthie's health was such that, there were two things happened. One was her health was such that my doctor, who lived across the road and was also my best friend, and we knew it was terminal, said, Janice, maybe if you got the opportunity to get back to school, it might be just as well. Because in those days, there were lots of good mother substitutes that were looking for jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing was that they were desperate for teachers, and they were crying for them, and they were knocking on your door, and I was going in and doing some supplying anyway. So I ended up at Central teaching occupations for a year in the tech wing, and I mean, fortunately, I knew how to sew and do a few things like that, so I could teach those kind of skills. I had a hairdresser come in and taught hairdressing, and I had a merchant from downtown come in and teach the merchandising, and they sent me off to teach some health classes while somebody else was teaching my class in the occupations. And so I didn't do any phys ed, but I did health.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that there weren't many decisions that you lost sleep over, but perhaps there were a few. Do any come to mind, ones that you really just struggled with, trying to figure out, is this the right direction for us to go?
Oh, there probably were lots of them, but I don't.
None that come to the surface.
I don't store those. No, if I lose them, you lose them, and you have to move on. And but I didn't lose a lot of them, and you know, I still have a lot of people when I go grocery shopping that still think I'm their mayor.
Who were some of the most favorite council members that you worked with? I remember you mentioned Ann and Mr. Kinsella, but how did your favorites make an impression upon you? Well,
when I became mayor, I had 3 bachelors who were 29 and unmarried, and I was supposed to find them all a wife. And one of them I just found out from the other day from the sister of one of the others that he has now married and has 5 kids under 6 or something or other. You know, he was sort of late at it and has done a fairly busy job since. Anyway, Greg Barker, that was, who was a Crown attorney in town, he came on in '88 as a 29-year-old bachelor. Dave Morrison came on as a 29-year-old bachelor, and Shane Mays came on as a 29-year-old bachelor. I never did find anybody for Dave Morrison, and the other 2 found their own. I didn't find them for them, but they were good members of council, you know, and they had what I find is in such short supply for members of council now, and that is careers before they go on council. You know, I don't think that full-time politicians being the only thing they've ever done is necessarily good. I mean, you know, one of them was a teacher, one of them owned a business in town, or was the son of his father owned a business that he was working in, which he ultimately operated, and the other was a lawyer, and they had all, you know, had some life experiences before they came. I started to say one of the things that I think makes good members of council, and I know helped me as the mayor, was that teachers don't ever pick their students. They are dealt a classroom of students in September, and it's up to them to get the best from those students. And the best is different for every student. And I found that I was able to do that with members of council. I could get them working together, and you know, much of what happened was because I had good members of council that worked well together and that let me put them into groups that worked well together, and the whole was better than every part of the parts. And I think that's a teacher skill to some extent, because you know, you get some that you wouldn't choose, but you still have to decide how you can get the best from those people and how you can get them working cooperatively. So
Absolutely.
in most cases, I mean, I don't think we ever had councils that were badly split on issues during my year. You know, we've hashed out a lot of it so that we found some compromises that worked for everybody.
What is one challenge about being mayor that the public never seems to grasp?
Well, the mayor has only one vote. You know, and the mayor, there were a couple letters, the editor at a paper that was sitting here this week, where somebody's blasting Lehman for things that, you know, over which he had absolutely no control, you know. So the fact that you have only one vote and you have a little more influence over others, that that you have more time to work with others to help them see your point of view sometimes than you might just as a member of council. But and you're very close to the staff and you get lots of help from them, and I baked them all cookies and they gave me lots of good ideas.
In terms of politicians, who were your role models, and does the public see you as a liberal or a conservative?
Oh, they see me as a liberal because my father was a liberal. My father was I mean, that's not why they see me. They didn't know my father. But my father was in the King government, was a federal member of parliament from 35 to 45 during the war years. He was also the mayor of Barrie, and and I grew up with that. So I had some of that in the background. I first ran for council because I had had a fairly serious medical scare. And I thought, my days may be numbered, and there are things I need to do that I haven't done. And one was I took up woodworking at North Collegiate Night School with a whole group of men again.
Oh, wow.
And I ran for council because they were sort of things that, that I wanted to be doing.
You're not afraid of a challenge, are you?
No, I went into the 74 election.
Let's actually see if we can bring that over here. John, would you mind passing us or Sam, the large picture over here?
Sure.
Do you want to pick that picture up, dear, and give it to us? Oh, Sam's got it.
Sam's going to grab it. We'll see if we can get that in the frame here. Just the big one. Okay. This is...
You're gonna reverse it, you're gonna be Pierre.
This is a pretty significant picture. Hopefully we can get that in the frame. We get a shot of that. That's super. And of course, for those who may not know, this is Janice Laking, of course, on the right, and on the left is former Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau. So tell us a little bit about this. So this would be one of your political mentors then?
Yes, I guess my father was my political mentor more than that, but certainly, I am a Pierre Trudeau fan, a very strong one. I think we were very fortunate to have him for the years we had him. I went into the 74 election after the writ came down, so there were a very limited number of days for campaigning, and the election, the Simcoe North that I ran in at that time had Dr. Reinert, who was the sitting member, conservative member in Aurelia. He'd been there forever. He delivered every baby in the county. And the riding was Aurelia, Matchadash. I couldn't even figure out where Matchadash was. Penetang, Machine, Midland. And I didn't get very far around. I mean, I had some help, and I actually took, Penetang Liberals always take. I took Penetang. That was no big feat, but I took it because I was Liberal, not because I was Janice Laking. But I have to think that part of Midland, which I took, was because I was Janice Laking. I came very close to defeating Dr. Reinert. If I'd had another week or so in the campaign, I think I could have. But anyway, I lost that one. But I didn't go in it expecting to win. I went in it at the last minute. But I ran again in 92, and I did expect to win then. Ed Harper became the sitting member, and the Reform Party, the only Reform member in Ontario, and there were 13 people in that election. So I had lots of competition. And Reform was pretty big at the time, and I had a lot of people that didn't want me to leave I say now, but they said then, we don't want you to leave because what have we got for a mayor if you leave? And, so I think I got some of that as well. Anyway, I lost that one by 118 votes.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was, but if I had gone there, I would have had to toe the line and say things that I didn't necessarily believe in. as the mayor of the city and as a member of council of the city, I could say exactly what I thought I wanted to say. And when I lost in 2000, I did all sorts of other interesting things, as you know.
Absolutely.
You asked me what one of the toughest challenges I had at City Hall, and one of them probably was getting a space for the artists in town.
Why was that challenging?
Well, because that wasn't high on the list of priorities of people that like roads and sewers better. And McLaren owned a house at the corner of Toronto and Wellington Street, and he was a family friend of my family and a good friend of mine over the years. And when he died, he left that building, and that all almost coincided with me going in as mayor. He left that building to the art gallery, to the artists in town, and to the city in partnership. And
now, was it the original library in that building on Mulcaster and Clyde?
no, I'm talking about the house now that's on Wellington and Toronto.
I see. Okay.
That now has a school in it.
Yes, Blythe Academy.
Blythe Academy. Well, that house was left to the city and to the gallery project, as it was called at that time, because I had talked to him many times over that project, and because part of when I was trying to save the fire hall was for art galleries. So art gallery has always been important to me. This spirit catcher was the first big donation that was given to the gallery project by Peacock, whose family owned the Utah quarries and brought all their gravel through Barrie to Toronto for the construction going on in Toronto. And he wanted to do something to in memory of his parents, and brought this from the West Coast, from the World's Fair. It was made for the World's Fair by an Ontario guy.
Did it go in 1986 or 88, somewhere around there?
Yeah, somewhere just about the same time I came on council.
And it's it's an icon of Barrie now.
Oh yes, yeah. No, I think it went into place. I don't know. I was there for the beginning of it when we, did the sweetgrass and all the things that we did. But whether that was just before I became mayor,
And this was put together for you to honor you for what?
Actually, a legacy for the McLaren. They give out a legacy award each year, and 2 years ago I was the recipient. It's a fairly new award that has been being given out.
So you have your own miniature spirit catcher.
I have, and you know what? The feathers will all move, and the feathers all moved on the original one when we got it, and then it was sort of like the fire hall falling down.
Yeah, they would fall.
In Mulcaster, and they got all concerned. Insurance rules our lives, a lot of insurance. So they got concerned about one did fall off, and whether that's going to kill somebody. So they
bolted them.
They were all immobilized, which is too bad, because Ron Baird's all his sculpture has moving parts, and that one doesn't have any moving parts anymore. Too bad, but.
Now, you're a woman of faith. You've been attending Collier Street United Church for many, many, many years. Did your faith ever influence your role as a politician, and if so, how?
I don't know that I can put that into words. I mean, I was baptized in Collier Street Church. It's a part of my life and has been. My father was buried there. My mother was... my mother's funeral was there. My father's, even though he died when he was in St. Thomas, the service was here, and the burial in Edgar and Guthrie, Borup Township, which is his home church. I guess generosity and cooperation and doing things that are the right thing to do. I guess if that's my faith, that's my philosophy.
You've worked on a lot of projects with a lot of Barrie residents. Which residents, not members of council, but which residents have made a lasting impression upon you, and how did they achieve it?
Jean McCann
Mm-hmm.
would be the first one that would come to mind, and that was partly because of the great assistant she was with me for Victoria Village. But
Mm-hmm.
Jean McCann, in the days before that, was a phenomenal volunteer within the community. She gave up a whole year of her life to go to Toronto to live within a Catholic residence for youth at risk.
Mm-hmm.
Just a wonderful, wonderful lady. She had a whole baseball team of her own. She had 9 boys and 1 girl or something. But,
Wow.
and she lived out in Letitia Street, just
Okay.
beyond Dan Street in their growing up days. So I would say Jean was, one of the ones that I had known earlier on,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
was still very important to me throughout those years. Reg Driscoll was phenomenally helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Many of the industrialists in town that, helped contribute. Jamie Massey was great. Rob Butler was great.
Mm-hmm.
When I needed things done and I needed people to help organize those things to be done. I mean, I did help Jamie Massey get an arena for his hockey team. So, there was some quid pro quo because you met them, you worked with them on one thing and then they were there to help you with other things that they normally
Mhm.
might not
Mhm.
have been that involved with. I mean, Jamie's been wonderful on the some of the developers in town, Henry Bernick, Emil Paduti, not Stoller, but his son now, who was a student of mine at North Collegiate as well, Marty Stoller, have made a big contribution to the city that they made a fortune in,
Mm-hmm.
but have given back
To the
very
city.
substantially. Henry Bernick grew up on a farm out between Thornton and Cookstown, and he said, well, when you kill the chicken, you gotta use the bones. I'm not sure how the saying went, but he really believed, and any time we worked with him as a developer, if we had a certain requirement they had to give us for parkland, Henry'd say, take twice as much. I mean, he just was very generous. Steve Sperling. Steve Sperling has been very active within the community without being on council, likes to think that he controls council sometimes, or, he certainly has enough influence, he has enough friendship with people on council, and he has been generous with his time and with his money to be helpful to the city. That's a tall order. There's so many people over the
course of the years.
That Sam Kinsella was wonderful before he became a member of council, and was wonderful after he was a member of council. And there are people like Dave Morrison who, are still working very hard on, because they helped us. Oh, Jean-Maurice Pigeon, who was the originator. He's born in Germany. His father is Canadian Air Force. His mother was German. And he's the reason that we started the twinning with Zweibrück in Germany.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, and he's been just phenomenal on, arranging for music groups to go over, for music groups to come back here. He's now working on the Harrogate and the Sir Robert Barry. That's our big push at the moment. Bill Sargent, who's retired, CIFS 8 from the base, is working on the Sir Robert Barry now too. And, yeah.
We have a couple of accolades that I want to show on camera. And this is another part of your life that I'd like you to briefly tell me a little bit about. Tell me what this is.
Well, let me do it in chronological order first. When I left council, I still had lots of energy and lots of enthusiasm, and I
You had lots of energy
yeah,
after.
yeah, I did. And I applied to be on the OMB because I thought with my planning background that would be good. So I went, Joe Tascona was the MPP at that time. I put in an application for OMB. And he came back and said, you're too old, they won't think about you for OMB because there's a lot of training involved and you haven't got enough years. They have them retired by the time you're your age rather than start them out at that age. But they need somebody on consent capacity, and would you fill out an application for that? And that, I hadn't really thought about that. And so I was appointed by the province by a conservative government, Mike Harris at the time, and Joe Tascona, the conservative member, good liberal that I am, to sit on that board, and I'm still sitting on it. I was working this morning on that, and we deal with mental health patients who are being held against their will and need to have a hearing. So that was the first thing I did, and then shortly after that, the federal government appointed me as a judge. That's what this is. Oh no,
This is your
that's
honorary
the honorary
colonel.
colonel. Oh, if I'm doing it chronologically, this started before that. 1997, while I was still mayor, I was appointed the first honorary colonel at Base Borden, and I was the honorary for 16 Wing, which is the Air Force Wing, and the birth of the Air Force is at Base Borden.
Wow.
So it was a very important. And I held that for many years after I was no longer mayor. So I was there for 9 years. And then I did the consent capacity.
Yeah, you were talking about being a judge, and I think
then in 2002, I was appointed by the federal government to be a citizenship court judge.
And this is your title here, Judge Janice R. Laking.
It is, and I think you've got a certificate with Art Eggleton's signature and the Prime Minister's signature or something's on there. And I commuted back and forth to Toronto to the federal building in Scarborough.
Well, we have your honorary doctorate in law.
Oh, that's Laurentian.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that just happened 2 years ago. And I don't know how they chose me, but anyway, that's pretty nice.
So Dr. Laking. That's what, well, I'm Dr. Doucette. I'm a doctor of ministry. So you're Dr. Laking and I'm Dr. Doucette. We could go into business together if we wanted.
Hey, we could.
The two doctors.
Yeah, just who's going to operate if somebody has a ruptured appendix or something?
We'll have to get a medical doctor for that.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Well, that's wonderful. And I think I have one more here that I want to show and have you speak about. Yes, right down here. Oh, okay, yeah. Present it to... Oh, yeah. This is from your time as honorary colonel as well.
Yes.
And what are we looking at here?
We're looking at the old airfield at the base and a painting that was done at the time when they were still having planes come in and out. Now they just have helicopters, but they're fairly active helicopter use at least now again, and that's good.
That's super. That's super. Well, a couple more questions as we kind of turn the corner and begin to wrap up. What happened in 2000 when you lost your seat as mayor? Why do you think you lost?
Well, I had been there for 12 years, and people think that there needs to be a change. They think there needs to be a house cleaning. They think you maybe left a little something in the corners or something. I think, politicians' lives are numbered. Years are numbered.
In your mind at the time, did you think, okay, I'm going to run in 2000 and this will be my last term?
Well, actually, I had thought about that a couple of times before that. I had thought, maybe it's time that somebody else, but then I looked around and the somebody else's I wasn't very keen about. And one of the somebody else's was Alderman Perry. And he ran against me in 97, and I whomped him big time. And he was one of the ones that ran against me and won.
Defeated you in 2000?
In 2000. Now, there were a number of others, too, that And I think he campaigned on the premise that I had been there long enough.
Hmm.
And that was maybe hard to argue with. I
Mhm.
might have wondered about that myself sometimes, but on the other hand, I was 10 years younger than Hazel McCallion, and she was still
Yeah,
very strong.
Mississauga.
Yeah.
Did you ever consider running again for council or for mayor after 2000?
Well, I have a lot of people. I still do. When I'm in the grocery store, or I'm out at things where people, not the new citizens in Barrie. It was
Mhm.
interesting. I went down to one of the grocery stores on Essa Road that I seldom go to, but I was in
Mhm.
that area the
Mhm.
other day, and I went in there, and John and I walked around in there, and for 15 or 20 minutes, I didn't have one person speak to me, and that's
Mm.
very unusual.
Unusual, yeah.
Because if I go down, any of the other grocery stores in the neighborhood, I've still got people say, "Why don't you run for mayor again? We need you,"
Mm.
or "You don't know me, but I recognize you, and I'm
Right.
so proud to see you,
Mm.
and I feel, So I get a lot of recognition generally, but I think that just shows that there's a whole other world in that south end
Yes,
that
that second
doesn't
city.
doesn't necessarily. And I had some concern about them building a new library down there, because I said maybe the people down there need to come downtown and know that we're on a lake. Because so many of them are leaving early in the morning to drive to Toronto, coming home, and they're
Mhm.
too tired to really be involved with very much with the city, which is unfortunate for them and for us.
You've now not been mayor longer than you were mayor. So as you reflect, how has this city changed in the past 15 years, and what are some of the challenges you think we're facing today?
Well, we haven't had the rapid growth that we had during my 12 years because we hit boundaries.
Right.
And we have now annexed an area, and it's still in a planning stage, so it hasn't been developed. So we've talked more about infilling, and a lot of the builders have found Minters, Durant, and Mills, or Innisfil, or one of these places that say that they're an agricultural community but still like to have houses. No house ever paid for itself. I mean,
True.
Because industries are great, but houses never pay, even with the development charges that we collect. It's only a fraction of the cost of providing the services that people within houses need. Well, we've made, it's very easy to be on the outside and say that, there have been some mistakes, and I think there have been mistakes. I think the parking garage was a mistake, and now they're trying to make up for it by selling off my site of my old, city hall and my, fire hall that is a very important parking lot in that area for the Collier Street Church, for the Presbyterian Church, for the Anglican Church, for, that's needed within, for the art gallery, for and for City Hall on market days, and they're going to sell that off. That's part of my birthright. I mean, just as the market square was part of my birthright, given to me by my ancestors, and it's now got that many building that's unfinished and was poorly developed in my eyes anyway, from a planning perspective, and I did a lot of it over my 27 years on council. It should never have come to the street. It should have been set back. It should have had some architectural amenities that are not there in my eyes. But anyway, and now it's, just...
Incomplete.
Oh, it's just a blight on the... Anyway, and that was my market square. And now the other part of what was my city hall, they're going to sell off. So, you can be critical of certain things that have happened. I can be positive about lots of... I think the transportation, even though people complain about it in the paper, I think we've had good engineers that have planned good roads and good routes throughout most of that expansion that's taken place. And yes, it's getting very congested now because of the number of people on those roads, but I think those transportation corridors have been good.
As a former student of Central, and certainly as someone that has a different bird's eye view of
Oh.
things. Can you help us understand historically how we got to the point where the board is going to close the oldest educational institution in Simcoe County?
Well, I've got to go back and say that my dealings with the county, and I have dealt with them a lot over the years, and whether it was sitting on long-term care committees, sitting with the county council and trying to amalgamate some of the townships and some of the municipalities within the county to get a fewer number, and you know, individually there have been some wonderful people on county council, but collectively there's been a lot of jealousy about Barrie. And there's been a lot of neglect about Barrie, because Barrie and Orillia are separated cities and are not contributing to the county, and unfortunately the province in their wisdom has given back some of the responsibility for things that the city should still have to the county. And they're not going to build things in town. So that takes me back to the schools. And if the school board, and I dealt with school boards, see, when Central was built, it wasn't a county school. We had a Barrie City board. And that Fisher Auditorium was built with Barrie money, Barrie taxes, and a lot of Barrie contributions to build the school. The decision was made. My granddaughter went to Portage View. She was in a grade 8 class there. Half the people were in town, half were out of town. The in-town ones went to Central. The out-of-town ones were put on a bus and sent out to Bear Creek, which was a new school, and it was a million miles away as far as I was concerned.
You would think if you go to Portage View, you'd go to
Well,
Central. It's down the road.
You'd think you would have kept the class together too.
Sure.
And you can send a bus anywhere you want to send a bus. So when they had decided back in 2000 or 99 or 2001, one of those years, and maybe before that they weren't going to keep Central. And so they didn't put any money in Central. So if they had capital money to spend, and a school in Orillia needed something, or some school in Midland needed something, you can be darn sure that that's where the money went. It didn't go to Central. You know, and Central Collegiate, as it stands now, is every stone in that school is younger than North Collegiate, where I taught.
Really?
Oh yeah, because North Collegiate was open in '56. I went down and taught for a year at Central in 1963, which was the opening of the whole new tech wing.
Right.
And the only part of my old school was then demolished and rebuilt. So there isn't a brick down there that was part of, you know, it's all younger than North. And North is sitting, you know, North is a box, you know, it didn't have much character ever.
Right.
You know, and their auditorium is a gym. I mean, it's ridiculous if they were going to, and there's no room to, you know, Central even had room that they could have built, you know, additions, or because of, you know, they dumped that fire hall next door, which was a really bad decision. It wasn't good. But no, I think that decision was made a long while ago, and I think it has to do with conflict between Barrie and county boards. And much as I may not be a Christian thing to say, I think it's there.
Yeah. And I can tell this whole issue brings about some frustration towards you. You're sad that it's
We should have kept a downtown school. We should have kept that auditorium that the citizens of Barrie paid for.
Why is it important for Barrie to have an institution downtown?
Well, because we're pushing for living accommodation downtown. You know, and if you keep talking about infilling and higher density in the downtown, then ultimately you're going to have some children in the downtown. I mean, I know we've gone through a period when there probably weren't a lot. But as I said before, you can send a bus anywhere you want to send a bus. So it doesn't have to have that population within its catchment area to be able to be saved. And if you're looking to the future, then you keep it for what you know, they're now talking about this very dense development across the road on the old tannery property, which is going to have a lot of townhouses and the kinds of dwellings rather than the high rise that maybe have a lot of retirees or people with dogs instead of children. But some of that ground development is going to have children.
So if you could, you know, if the trustees of the current board were listening, what would be one or two things that you would tell them in terms of Central's future?
That it's central to the city, that it has a role to play not only for students, but for all the other activities that can take place within a school building when students are not using it for school. And that includes the evenings and the summers, you know, and that football field that was called the Red Story Field. I was at school with Red Story. Well, I was at school with his younger brother George. And Gene McCann, who I mentioned earlier, was the push again for that, you know, for the irrigation of that field, so there would be one better football, soccer field in Barrie than we had before that.
The Fisher Auditorium, of course.
The Fisher Auditorium, the band history that's there, you know, it's just, I think it's tragic. And I think that all the school boards looked at is the dollars and cents, and they say, well, you know, that's a pretty nice site. We can sell that for big money. And we're more interested in big money than we are in heritage or history.
Or educating our students for that matter.
Or educating our students, or having the opportunity within the core of the city to do all the other things that could happen in the city.
Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. I think that's very important, and I think you offer a very, what ought to be a very influential perspective with your career and with your background in city planning. I want to switch gears here real quick. When I talked to others about you, I asked a couple of people, some that you had mentioned before, to give me some adjectives that describe Janice Laking. And here's some of the words that they gave.
Should I stay and listen to them?
I think you should. They said this about Janice Laking. They said she is kind. They said she is trustworthy. They said that she's integral. Many said that she is competent, that she is smart, that she is friendly. Do you feel like you lived up to these characteristics as mayor?
And I think I have had a vision that has been broader and further down the road than many others, and I think that I have been fortunate that some of those long-range decisions I made have been really worthwhile, and some of the planning I've done. I'll never be an artist. I collect original art. I only have original art on my end. I love glass, as you can tell. I will never feel that I am an artist, but to some extent the planning that took place while I was involved with the city, I can look at things that have happened and I feel that I really helped with that.
A lot of people like you. What do you make, what is it about you that is so endearing with people? So many people in our community like the Lakings. Why have you been so endearing?
Well, my staff just love me because I took cookies out to them.
Oh, okay, so it's the cookies.
And I still get, I met a guy the other day, he said, I was down at the Barrie Arena for years and you used to always bring me cookies. And I haven't had any of your cookies for years. I said, I'm still in the same house, the address is in the phone book, I always have cookies in my cupboard.
I'm going to have to remember this after the interview's done, because I think I need to try a Janice Laking cooking.
Yeah.
Well, we've come to our last question, here it is. What do you miss about being mayor, and aside from the aforementioned projects, what will historians write and remember Mayor Janice Laking as?
Well, now that's sort of two questions you've asked me. What I miss most are the people. And that's what was so good about all those years. I'm a people person. I like people. I like people even that I don't like very well. You know, I like to be with people. I like to exchange ideas.
Mm.
So that's the like. Now, what was the other half
What
of
will
that?
historians write and remember Janice Laking as?
That she headed a government that was inclusive
Mm.
and cooperative
Mm.
and accomplished a lot because the people that were on the council like being on the council and working with her.
Mm. That's a wonderful legacy to be remembered by.
Yeah,
Janice
pretty
Laking,
nice.
I want to thank you for your time. You were my mayor. This is exciting.
Well, usually it's my teacher. I've got a lot of those out there too, you see, over all those years. And that's part of what got me elected. You know, that's what got me elected.
Mm-hmm.
I kept turning up former students everywhere I went when I went knocking on doors. Oh, Mrs. Laking!
I'll vote for you.
Yeah, if they call me Mrs. Laking on the main street, I say, oh, North Collegiate. If they call me Janice, I say, and what department did you work in?
Mm. Well, thank you so much for your time today, for sharing your memories, and thank
Well,
you for your contributions to our great city.
You're welcome.
Okay. All the best
Well,
to you.
thank you for what you're doing, and thank you, young man, for your patience on that camera.
Of course.
We'll get a cookie now.
All the best.